Hello everyone, Sunderak here. So this video will be about the pre-game analysis for the Queen of Summer Festivals, Yoimiya, who will be coming on August the 10th or August the 11th. I don't know exactly when, but she'll be the second banner of this patch. Now of course, before you click away thinking she's a worse version of Hu Tao, which is I think what I've seen on most people's, what I've seen where most criticism about her was that basically she only specializes in single target. She is a worse version of Hu Tao. Hu Tao can do more damage than her. And of course, before you click away because of that, I just want to tell you for the rest of the video, I'm actually going to be telling you a different way she can play other than Hu Tao. And then even though she is also a single target specialist like Hu Tao, however, the way her kit is built, she has her own artifact set and she has her own niche playstyle, which is very different from Hu Tao's. So I would say if you have Hu Tao, she might not be someone you have to get. However, if you do not have Hu Tao and you get her, it's going to be a different play experience than having a Hu Tao per se. However, she and Hu Tao does specialize in the same aspect, so unless you are a whale or someone who spends on almost every character, there is no need to get both of them, because they do, even though their playstyle will be different in that niche, but they do both fill the same niche of Pyro single target specialist. So before we get started, just also want to say that Yoimiya's legendary quest is out, so if you have not tried her already, you can actually try her out as a playable character right now in her legendary quest. What I did personally was I actually took a team which I think would work with her, and then instead of treating it like an actual fight and trying to beat it down as fast as possible, I took my time, I tested her numbers, and I tested whether I like her playstyle or not. That is something that you guys should do as well, because this is an actual fight. It is going to be a better testing than the trial we get in August the 10th, and also on top of that, do note that she is equipped with 4-piece Noblesse Oblige for some reason, so do take that in mind when you're taking a look at her numbers. With that out of the way, let's jump into the pre-game analysis. So first, let's talk about conclusions. Yoimiya is someone who covers her own team in a sense where she doesn't really need any support other than to cover up the fact that she needs energy recharge and she needs to deal with AoEs sometimes. So other than those two, she doesn't really need any sort of supporting any other aspects, especially that she doesn't work really well with a nuke buff playstyle, which most Pyro DPS used to specialize in. Even Hu Tao's Q can pull that off, a single big damage number and one-shotting everything. Because Yoimiya has no very big damage numbers and her auto attack is split into 7 different hits, so she can't really play with that style. And on top of that, because of that, she can't really play along with Xingqiu very well. So she is actually one of those few Pyro DPS that doesn't need a Xingqiu. I guess in that case, it's actually a bonus for most people, because Xingqiu is really wanted by everyone, but at the same time, she doesn't really work with that playstyle. Her playstyle is more of dual DPS playstyle. So secondly, she is a single target specialist like Hu Tao. However, as I've said before, they have very different playstyle and team comps, even though they fill the same niche. And because the fact that her charge attack doesn't work as well as Ganyu's, even though she is played as a DP, she can be played as a DPS, because the downtime of her E is actually not very much, even at C0. However, she is best played in a dual DPS comp, where you have another sub DPS or someone who has significant cooldown like Childe subbing for the second half of that, and then these two can play off each other's cooldown times. So for artifact wise, the best I would recommend is actually Shiminawa's Reminiscence. Counter to what the beta server has been doing, most of her beta servers has been using 4-piece Crimson Witch of Flames, but as I have explained before, she doesn't really play off reactions very well because she applies pyro very fast, and on top of that, her rates are like Ganyu split up into very multiple small multipliers rather than one huge multiplier. She doesn't play off Vaporize or any other. She doesn't really use reactions as her main source of damage, so as a result, 4-piece Shiminawa's Reminiscence might actually do better than Crimson Witch of Flames with the correct team setup. For weapon wise, if you're looking for 5 stars, of course her new bow is the best option. Almost bow works as well, however you are probably not getting all 4 of the 5 stacks of Almost. However, if you're able to get even any stack, is pretty good. 4-star wise, if you're looking at more of a DPS playstyle where you do want to do charge shots with her, Demon Slayer bow is her best option. However, if you're looking at a pure sub DPS playstyle where you don't even use her charge shots, Rust is the better option. Now moving on to a few more comments about her. Because she is a single target specialist, her AoE needs to be met in an overload comp generally speaking, which is her best build. And there's another comp I'll recommend that's also non-overload that covers this up very well. However, basically she needs either a support or her counterpart Dual DPS needs to cover up the AoE part. Otherwise there is no AoE to the team, she will be very weak against that. However, as soon as that part is covered up, her single target specialist damage starts to shine because she actually hits quite hard when she is doing her job right. C4 plus, she can be truly played as a DPS because C4 is in charge of decreasing the cooldown of her E, which is her main source of damage. So with that decrease, basically you can imagine a Hu Tao but with pretty much up to no cooldown, so that is very scary if you're looking into that. However, again, because her numbers are going to be lower than Hu Tao, so that puts it under control. And finally, if you already have Hu Tao, my recommendation would be to skip her and save for Bao, who might be coming in a future banner. But of course, if you want her, if you like her for her aesthetics and playstyle, go for her of course. And I'm just saying that she and Hu Tao covers the same part, so unless you need 2 pyro single target specialists in the Abyss, there is not much of a need gameplay wise to pull for her if you already have Hu Tao. So now let's go over her kit very fast. I'll be mostly explaining what her kit does, however I'll be also making some comments regarding her kit. So for normal attack, she can combo up to 5 hits like most bow users. And on top of that, her charge shot like Ganyu has 2 stages. Stage 1 is a single pyro arrow, basically Amber's charge shot. Stage 2, it will produce up to 3 kindling arrows. However, do note that after stage 1, it takes a bit to enter stage 2, and after stage 2 the 3 kindling arrows take some time to produce. So overall, at least my personal feel, her fully charged shot seems to take a little bit longer than Ganyu to charge, because for Ganyu she only needs to wait for the bloom, a single bloom to charge up for the entire AoE, whereas for Yoimiya you need to wait for the 3 kindling arrows to charge up one by one. Also, they do charge very fast once they start charging, however you do still have to wait for 3 instead of 1, that's why it's taking a little bit longer, at least my personal opinion. I do not have the exact numbers right now. And the kindling arrows will fire when she is releasing her arrow. Her arrow will need to target enemies on by her, so like you will need to aim. However, the kindling arrows will automatically target nearby enemies. Also note that the kindling arrow might not be targeting the enemy that you are targeting. Say if you have a slime 20 meters away but you have a hilichurl 10 meters away, if you aim at the slime, the kindling arrow will most likely target the hilichurl 10 meters away instead, for safety protective measures of course. And the kindling arrow on top of the pyro charge shot will both cause pyro damage when hits. And another thing to note is that her playstyle, her charge shot playstyle is quite different from Ganyu's. For Ganyu's, if you look at Ganyu's numbers, the majority of her charge shot damage is actually coming from the bloom, not her actual hit. So when her arrow misses, it's no big deal because you're only losing a small portion of the DPS. However, your bloom, as long as your bloom hits, which is very easy because the range is huge, then you get that damage overall. You're just losing a little bit more on the top DPS. However, in Yoimiya's case, it's completely different. The major source of damage comes from the arrow, not the kindling arrow. So they're both called arrows for some reason. However, her main source of damage comes from the actual arrow she is firing, not the kindling arrows. So if you manage to miss your actual arrow but hit the kindling arrows, you're pretty much not doing as much damage as it's worth to charge up all that time. That is actually one thing I noticed while playing with Yoimiya in her basically character trial during her legendary quest. And finally, on top of that, her charge shot cannot be used. Her charge shot is more used as a last resort if you're playing her as a DPS before C4. It is used for that basically that period of downtime when after you cast everyone's E and Q, you're waiting for her Q to play up, her E is still on cooldown, that's when you use her charge shot. It's more of a last resort. However, this problem is completely negated when you play her as a sub DPS. But again, if you play her as a sub DPS, you don't get to experience the charge shot part of her kit. So it's sort of a trade-off. But personally, I'm leaning towards more of the sub DPS build because again, saying the truth, her charge shot doesn't do as much damage as you would be expecting if you are, comparing her to Ganyu, because that's Ganyu's main source of damage. Her main source of damage is E, which we'll talk about next. So E, or her elemental skill. It is the first arrow infusion in Genshin Impact actually, other than of course charge shots. So this is the first infusion that is not a catalyst, because catalysts are infused and it's not of the melee weapons. It will have 10 seconds uptime, 18 seconds downtime. Last time I made a video about Yoimiya, back when I still do leaks. Most people commented that it's 15 seconds downtime. No, it's actually 18 seconds downtime. The reason being 15 seconds cooldown is actually for her Q, not her E. So her Q and her E both got a buff. Her E was originally 20 seconds cooldown, same with her Q. Her Q got buffed to 15 seconds cooldown, her E got buffed to 18 seconds cooldown. So it is 18 seconds. And please don't leave any more comments on that, because the last time I got, I think, 20 comments on that or something like that. Her auto attacks under her effects of E, so for 10 seconds turn into pyro damage, and will also gain a separate damage multiplier. So the damage bonus, if you're curious on how it is calculated exactly, it will be calculated as the 9th multiplier on top of the 8 multiplier, which are normally calculated. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail for how damages are calculated, but essentially normally for a normal character who doesn't have as much mechanics, you have 8 different multipliers that gets calculated to deal your final damage. So this one is actually calculated once those 8 numbers are already calculated together, so it's a full increase in her damage. Instead of, it does not get consumed into another portion, it does not get added into a damage section, so it is the full damage bonus you're getting. And if you want a sense of how hard she hits, theoretically she hits harder than Diluc's infused attacks when she is under her E state, but given her attack speed versus Diluc's attack speed, this is significantly more damage than Diluc. Of course, Diluc is a 1.0 character, makes it unfair to compare her with Diluc, but that's the damage we're looking at if you want to take a theoretical look at how hard her E can hit. And also during her E's uptime, fully charged shot will not produce kindling arrows. I mean, of course, why would you do that anyways? You do not want to produce kindling arrows, you want to deal as much damage as possible. And also, if you're wondering, during a 10 seconds uptime, if you're playing no delay, no dodging, just you have your shield up, you're basically tanking for 10 seconds, she can finish 2 auto cycles, or almost finish 2 auto cycles, depending on if you are able to squeeze in an animation cancel here or there. So that is what we're basically looking at. For 10 seconds on average, she hits 1 hit per second, although do note that her entire auto cycle is 7 hits in 5 times 7 hits, so overall she'll be doing 14 hits in total with her 10 seconds uptime. Moving on to Elemental Burst, I will not be saying the name here, again I don't know how to pronounce that. Basically what it happens, it causes an initial AoE pyro damage, then after that it applies an Aureus Blaze onto a nearby enemy. Aureus Blaze is similar to Riptide, however it is different on the fact that only one enemy can have the Aureus Blaze effect at any time. The Aureus Blaze effect will last 10 seconds, it's an independent timer away from the cooldown of her Q, and on top of that, the Aureus Blaze can tick once every 2 seconds, dealing dot damage, which means damage over time. So every single time it ticks, so every single time any character other than Yoimiya, so basically Yoimiya needs to switch off the field, any other character's auto charged EQ plunging attack damage hits an Aureus Blaze affected enemy, that enemy will deal small AoE pyro damage onto nearby enemies. And on top of that, if the Aureus Blaze affected enemy is defeated, the status of Aureus Blaze will be transferred onto a nearby enemy. However, the timer does not refresh. The timer is succeeded from the original timer, which means overall you're only getting 10 seconds. There is no more time. And finally, on top of that, if Yoimiya is defeated and the Aureus Blaze has not been passed onto an enemy, so it is still on the original enemy, then that Aureus Blaze will disappear. However, if it is passed onto a nearby enemy, so it is no longer the original Aureus Blaze, it will be considered not the original Aureus Blaze, and in that case, it will be considered not to be produced by Yoimiya, which means it will not disappear in this case. And finally, we're looking at a 15 seconds cooldown and 18 seconds energy cost. Now, I know most people are saying this is probably worse than Ganyu, because Ganyu is 15 seconds cooldown and 60 energy cost. This is a hard 20 extra energy needed to pull this off. However, I would say that later in this video during King Comp, I'll talk about the solution where basically every single Inazuma character will get to solve their 80 energy cost problems, because all of them so far, Sayu, Yoimiya, and Ayaka are both 80 energy cost, and all of them have their different ways of solving their problems. However, there is a universal solution, which I'll talk about later. Moving on to her talents, of course I won't talk about her third passive, it's actually the first one. It's good for making stuff in the housing system, so that's all I'll talk about. Moving on to her actual 2 passives that deals with damage. At level 20, she unlocks her first passive, which is under the state of her E, which basically means she is pyro infused for her auto attacks. When Yoimiya hits an enemy, increase her pyro damage bonus by 2%, lasts 3 seconds, can stack up to 10 times. Now this looks pretty good on paper because we're looking at a max of 20% pyro damage bonus. However, theoretically, because each cycle is only 7 hits, as I've said before, here is the exact cycle time. Each cycle, on top of the fact that some of them has times a number, so that means overall when she does her 5 hit combo, it overall hits enemies 7 times, and that means in order to stack up to 10 times, you only have 3 hits left under the state of her E, because I've said previously her E is enough for you to pull out 14 hits. So once 10 time is up, you still have 3 to 4 hits left, because that 14 hits is the theoretical maximum damage, and most of the time you will not be able to achieve that. Finally, for her second passive at level 70, after using her Q for the next 15 seconds, nearby members, again exclude Yoimiya, will gain a 10% attack increase for 15 seconds. On top of that, by the time this is triggered, so by the time the Q is released, depending on how many buffs she has stacks from her level 20 passive, so basically depending on how much extra pyro damage bonus she has, the attack increases by 1%. Now, assume you do everything correctly, you are able to definitely stack up to 20% pyro damage bonus by the end of those 10 seconds. And when that happens, when you press your Q, you are effectively giving all your team members a 20% attack increase, which is why she is very good, and which is also why her entire playstyle, at least before C4, resolves around using her E, does her damage, release her Q, then goes off field for another DPS to come in and cover up the damage. So this is her central playstyle, and this is the idea that has been placed through during her entire kit design, and as long as you're before C4, this is something that you should follow to maximize her damage. Finally, quickly glossing over her constellations. Again, I know most of you guys probably won't be getting this, so I'll do it very fast. C1 Q basically lasts 4 seconds longer, which effectively means 2 extra ticks. Not much, but it's a good damage increase. And on top of that, when enemy under the original Aureus Blaze is defeated, so basically the first enemy that is affected by Aureus Blaze created by her Q is defeated, Yoimiya's attack is increased by 20%, lasts 20 seconds. Now of course, I believe C1 is not enough to make her to stand on the field after casting her Q, even though this is. However, I believe this 20% attack increase does work off field to increase the damage of the rest of her Aureus Blaze ticks. So it's a good damage bonus there. And if you're wondering, equivalently, it is approximately 8% damage increase, because this 20% gets added to the attack instead of calculated as a damage multiplier as talked about before. So this is not actually 20%. Overall, it goes down to about 8% damage increase. Moving on to C2. C2, when Yoimiya's pyro damage crits, which means it lands a critical hit, Yoimiya gains 25% pyro damage bonus, lasts 6 seconds, can be triggered from off field, so even Aureus Blaze can trigger this. Now, since Yoimiya is going to be always doing pyro damage bonus, unless you build her physical, which in that case you have my respect, this is not the correct video for you, but unless you do that, she is practically going to keep this up at all times, which translates to an equivalent of around 12.5% damage increase overall. C4, when Q's Aureus Blaze is exploded, so whenever her Q's Aureus explodes does a tick, decrease E's cooldown, basically decrease her elemental skills cooldown by 1 second. So together with C1, which makes her Q last up to 14 seconds, which 2 extra ticks, so goes up to 7 ticks in total. This can decrease her Q by a total of 7 seconds, and this can do so very consistently as long as you're still hitting enemies. Because as said before, her Aureus Blaze can literally trigger by anyone other than Yoimiya with any of their attacks as long as they deal damage. So as long as you're still hitting my enemies, you're looking at a 7 seconds cooldown on your E at all times, which 7 seconds cooldown off the original time on your E at all times, which means practically you're looking at a 3 seconds cooldown. And of course, during those 3 seconds, you can cast your other character's EQ, and worst case, it is a single charge shot worth of time. So overall, this basically turns her into a main DPS playable character, and as long as you have her C4 or higher, there is no longer the need to play her as a dual DPS character. She is good on her own as a main DPS, which is why she is going to be similar to Childe in the sense that she's kind of bit pay to win if you want to experience her full kit. But honestly, same argument with Childe. Childe actually shines at C1, C6 is completely not necessary. This might be a similar case here. With all the E's and Q's of the other 3 characters you have to cast, there is honestly 3 seconds cooldown is probably too short, and overall you're probably wasting uptime with your E, because you just have the E's cooldown up to such a amount of short time where you basically can cast everyone's E and Q within 3 seconds. So I would say this one's probably nice to have, but definitely not necessary. Finally, her C6, during the effects of her E, Yoimiya's auto attack has a 40% chance to fire a second arrow. The second arrow will deal 50% of the original one's damage or auto targets enemies, and this is effectively, if you do the math, 40 times 50, you're looking at 20% damage multiplier increase on her auto attacks when she is under her E. But given your C4, she is pretty much up all the time. This translates to an effective 20% damage multiplier on her entire auto attack sequence, which is basically most of her attacks. Finally, after going some general comments about her before moving on to team comps. Yoimiya is best played as a sub DPS, again exclude C4 and above. However, Yoimiya can still be played as a main DPS if you want, although her downtime would be kind of a hard thing to fill. Hopefully you will have a sub DPS or multiple sub DPS in the slots to fill those. And also, if you have her above C4, Yoimiya can become a pretty scary main DPS. Basically imagine someone who does slightly less damage than Hu Tao, because her numbers are not going to be as impressive as Hu Tao's, because that's not what she specializes in. Anyone that specializes in melt or vaporize reactions are going to have much nicer numbers. But imagine a Hu Tao, but basically with pretty much no downtime on her E. She basically practically has only 3 seconds downtime, and that is pretty much only almost no downtime. So basically imagine a Hu Tao with no downtime, but doing slight less damage. So she can be a very scary DPS if she is C4 or higher. And secondly, as stated before, because like Ayaka, her elemental applications are very fast. Basically no one can keep up with her applying Hydro, and on top of that, her damage multiplier are split into smaller numbers, and there's a multiple of them instead of one giant number. Even her Q number is not big enough to play like one-time melt reactions, because one-time vaporize reactions, because that is not her kit. So overall, she won't work best in a vaporize team. Same case with Ayaka, and the reaction, because in a vaporized team, reaction actually needs to do a significant piece of damage. Now, because of this, her actual best artifact set, at least in my personal opinion, is the 4-piece Shimenawa's Reminiscence, and that is actually the artifact set designed for her, not for Keqing. Although Keqing can use that set, but this is better in her case because, as I'll explain later, she can basically ignore the 15 energy particle drain because she has ways to recover that, and on top of that, the timer of the 4-piece works perfectly with the timer of her E. Finally, she is someone who doesn't really want to cast her Q as soon as it's up because she needs to leave the field, at least before C4 again, after casting her Q, because that's when her teammates can take the advantage of all the passives of her Q. So like Hu Tao, she is not someone who wants to use her Q as soon as they are up. And again, as for the energy drain, the person to actually cover up for that is actually Electro MC. So now moving on to team comps, where I will talk about Electro MC in one of the team comps. Now for team comps, if you have her C4 or higher, please don't watch the rest of the video. There is no point. You can pretty much pair her with whoever you want, and you can probably restart Abyss fine. Like, the game is not at the point where C4 is still struggling with Abyss. So if you're playing her C4, go with what team comp you want. However, if you're playing her below C4, I'll be recommending 2 team comps here. Both are dual DPS team comps. So the 2 dual DPS I'll recommend is Yoimiya and Ganyu, and Yoimiya and Childe. So one important thing to know regarding dual DPS team comps is that the main support, who is basically placed in the third slot, needs to be compatible with both DPS. Otherwise, you're basically running 2 separate teams of 2 instead of having a team of 4. Now, generally for dual DPS team comps, we're looking at main DPS 1, main DPS number 2, then a support that can both a support or a sub DPS that can work with both of them, and finally the last person we're looking at is basically a utility support that fills in the role as needed. So let's start with Ganyu and Yoimiya's team comp build. So in Ganyu and Yoimiya's case, Kazuha or Venti fills in the support of the main support very well, because they both need crowd control, both Ganyu and Yoimiya, and both Ganyu and Yoimiya, both Venti and Kazuha can provide some sort of damage buff, whether it be Kazuha's case directly increasing elemental damage bonus, or Venti's case decreasing the res of nearby enemies. Both of them can provide some sort of buff onto them for more damage output. So they are considered the best option for this team comp. Now, many of you are probably going to ask about Sucrose. Sucrose's specialization is in reaction damage buff and not exactly crowd control. She can crowd control, but the long cooldown makes it kind of hard for her to do the job well. She can of course sub in for this job if you do not have any other person to do this job. However, she won't be the best option, that's all I will say. Finally, for the last spot, all you need is a utility support. Bring a shielder or bring a healer, or bring Diona. She does both. So overall, the last spot is just whatever you need, put that in there. And the good news for this comp is, because this comp doesn't really care about melt damage, like melt damage is a nice thing on top for this comp, because this comp doesn't really care about melt damage. Like, melt damage is a nice bonus on top, but it's not needed at all. So overall, you can pretty much squeeze in whoever you want in the last spot. The elements does not matter. As long as you have someone in, it's cool. And on top of that, the best thing about this comp is actually Yoimiya's Q and Ganyu's Q can buff each other's damage overall. Like, imagine having Ganyu's Q up and Yoimiya auto-targeting. That is pretty much melt on every hit. And if you imagine Yoimiya's Q is up, Ganyu is doing charge shots, that's pretty much Aureus Blaze on every hit. So overall, it's pretty nice damage buff they're having for both. But again, the melt is not the focus here, it's a nice damage on top. The second team comp I'll recommend more demonstrates the style that melt or vaporize is not needed to make Yoimiya powerful. She works in her own ways. The second one I would recommend is Yoimiya and Childe. Now, of course, as I have said before, the third spot is best filled by actually Electro MC. Now again, for the fourth spot, bring a utility support. You can bring whatever element you want. There is no restriction here. Now I want to talk about exactly why Electro MC is useful. In case you haven't watched my video on that, I have a video explaining why Electro MC might be the one that everyone needs in Inazuma. So first of all, Electro MC together with the new ER set can generate a ton of particles. On top of that, most of the particles are generated when she or he is not on the field, which makes it very helpful that they are able to support whoever is the main DPS, so that they are not the ones getting charged first at all times, whereas the main DPS is actually the one absorbing the energy particles. On top of that, whenever they absorb energy particles, the Electro MC has multiple ways of buffing them with energy recharge bonus. So basically, when that happens, all the Electro MC needs to do is to stack up on energy recharge, and there you got yourself a Yoimiya or a Childe that is basically looking at a very high energy recharge bonus on top of all the damage they're doing. And finally, Electro MC's Q is off-field, which means it's basically very good in the sense that it not only increases energy recharge, gives you energy particles basically every other second, and on top of that, it works together with Childe to cause Electro Charge, it works together with Yoimiya's Kit to cause Overload, both of which deals AoE damage, which completely covers up Yoimiya's weakness for no AoE. And on top of that, Overload is good when breaking shields, Electro Charge is good for basically slowly taking away large groups of enemies, so both of which completely covers up Yoimiya's weakness, and this is why Electro MC is so powerful in this team comp. Now finally, one mask to do here, basically regarding the fact that she has to drain 15 energy to start the 4-piece of Shimenawa's Reminiscence. I'll explain how the 4-piece works exactly with her afterwards. But the mask to do here is Electro MC's E without any energy recharge buff at 100% energy recharge can recover up to 12 energy particles just for free. And on top of that, the Electro MC's E will always have some sort of energy recharge because you will be stacking energy recharge on her, which effectively means Electro MC's E will be able to at least net out Yoimiya's E 15 energy cost when she casts her E. And on top of that, it might even generate more energy particles if you're able to stack up Electro MC's energy recharge up to maybe 200% or even higher, because 300% energy recharge has been doable in the past. So it's very likely that even when with the 15 energy cost of Shimenawa's Reminiscence, the Electro MC will be able to benefit Yoimiya in the sense that Yoimiya will not be actually losing energy but gaining energy from casting that, because the Electro MC's E is very powerful at energy recharge. Finally, before we end talking about Yoimiya's side of things and move on to Childe, I just want to show you guys exactly how it works perfectly, the Yoimiya's timers as well as Shimenawa's Reminiscence. It's hard to say that it's not a coincidence. It's basically designed for her. So basically, for the 4-piece, after casting an elemental skill, if the character has 15 or more energy, lose 15 energy, and normal charge plunging attack damage is increased by 50% for 10 seconds. Now, 2 things to know here: how do you activate Yoimiya's infusion state? You cast her E. How do you activate the 4-piece of the Shimenawa's Reminiscence? You cast her E. There is basically the same action does both. There is basically no downtime to cast both things. They cast by the same action. And second of all, ignore the 15 energy cost. How long does Yoimiya's E last? 10 seconds, of course, without C1. And how long does Shimenawa's Reminiscence last? 10 seconds. So it's safe to say that this set is especially designed at least with her in mind. So, and she is the only character who is able to abuse this set with the perfect amount of timers. Finally, just want to quickly gloss over how Childe works in this team comp. Now, of course, Childe is still one of the main DPS, even though we're talking about Yoimiya team comp. But in the fact that Yoimiya has to play with a dual DPS, it's better if we touch on Childe at this point. So Childe, the main stuff to talk about is Electro Charge. Childe's specialty is Hydro AoE, and what does Electro Charge enemies? Electro Charge needs to spread onto enemies if the enemy is Hydro affected, and what is Childe's specialty? Hydro AoE damage. So basically means as long as the MC has some sort of electro structure left on the field, whether it be one of those pieces that you can pick up to gain extra energy or be the off-field Q, as long as Childe is on the field and the enemies are relatively close, even without a crowd control character, you can easily apply the over Electro Charge status onto all nearby enemies and slowly hacking them away in terms of damage. And on top of that, all reactions other than Vaporize and Melt got a recent buff in patch 1.6, which means this comp actually does more damage than before. And finally, the extra energy you get for Childe from the Electro MC will allow him to spam Q more often, which is more damage and more Hydro reactions. And of course, if you time it correctly, Childe and Yoimiya can play off a few Vaporizes here and there. It's not necessary, but it's good bonus on top. But it won't be the main focus because the Electro MC will be weaving in his or her E and Q at all times, which means it's going to be hard for those two to play off Vaporize. But again, that's not the main focus. So that's all I have for Yoimiya. Sorry the video took very long, but I just want to explain everything I have in mind. So overall, I believe that she is going to find her own place to shine in a team that is very different from a Hu Tao's build, because Hu Tao basically works with Xingqiu and then go kaboom big damage. She is going to work quite differently from that. And she is in no way a budget Hu Tao in the sense that Sucrose is in no way a budget Venti. They do the similar job, but they have very different niche that they work with, and they have very different team comp that they work with. The only thing Yoimiya and Hu Tao have in common is that they are both pyro single target specialists. That's all. And I believe that if you don't have Hu Tao, Yoimiya is worth a try. Of course, do wait for her actual numbers to settle down, because these are the numbers still based on before she came out. They can do any last second change. However, I believe that if you don't have Hu Tao, she is not as bad as everyone thinks she is, and it's definitely worth a try for her, because otherwise, after what happened with Zhongli, I believe MiHoYo has learned their lesson to never basically release a second version of Zhongli on release again. So she is a 5-star, so her damage number is gonna be look good. That's what I want to say for this video. Thank you very much if you are watching all the way till the end. If you like the video, please consider subscribing. Thank you and have a nice day.